It is good to connect again this week, particularly as we arrive ever so closely to the beginning of Holy Week. That where we stand today leads us on a downhill slope to the Sunday that we call Palm Sunday, that triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem that is the beginning of Holy Week, the week that redefines all of our other weeks. And Holy Week will take us into the shadows and the darkness of Good Friday, which always precedes the light and joy of Easter morning. And along this journey of Lent, we have looked to the richness of the spirituals that have a great deal to teach us about Lent and life, about faith and hope. And doing that, we are leaning on the work of Luke Powery out of Duke Divinity School. Lent does not turn a blind eye to the heartache and suffering that we find around us throughout the world, which of course is marked by the shadows of Good Friday. Nor do the spirituals. They are honest about the tears that have been shed because of tragic heartache and suffering. So they have served as a guide for us. And today we are thinking about that powerful spiritual that begins to lead us to the edge of Good Friday. "O Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn." Talking about the pain and agony of Mary, the mother of Jesus, who experienced Good Friday from a vantage point that speaks to us all. Here is some of the text of that powerful spiritual. "O Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn? Pharaoh's army got drowned. O Mary, don't you weep. Some of these mornings, bright and fair, take my wings and cleave the air. Pharaoh's army got drowned. O Mary, don't you weep. When I get to heaven, gonna sing and shout, nobody there for to turn me out. When I get to heaven, going to put on shoes, run about glory, and tell all the news." That it's a spiritual speaking to those who are enslaved, who dream of heaven as a place where they can put on shoes. That if we were to try to stretch our imagination to better understand what those who suffered slavery dealt with, the idea of just having a pair of shoes speaks of heaven to them, where they can run around and shout the good news of God's love. That there is no one in heaven to turn them out. That all of us, those who have been oppressed, those who have suffered, are welcomed and embraced in God's love. That, "O Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn," takes us to the very edge of Good Friday, which is important for the Lenten journey because there is no way to get to Easter except through the shadows of Good Friday. That this spiritual looks at Good Friday through the eyes of Mary, the mother of Jesus. And it says, "Mary, don't you weep." And we need to pause there because it is not a critique of Mary's tears, that rather it is pointing Mary's tears towards the hope of God, because there is nothing wrong with our sadness or our weeping. That there is sorrow and grief, that even Jesus wept. But as we cry, we must remember the hope that we find in the waters of baptism. Because the waters of baptism represents the death and resurrection of Jesus, where we are buried underneath the water, as in burying someone in the ground. But when we emerge from those waters, it is as if Jesus rose from the grave, that love is stronger than death. And our tears so often, like Mary's do, point to those that we love, those that we care about, those that are hurting or suffering. But it says to Mary, remember Pharaoh's army drowned, that Pharaoh was the one who represented the force of slavery, the force of death, the force of suffering. And the spiritual reminds us that life prevails over death. Freedom prevails over despair. That the spiritual points us back to the grace of God we find in the past, because that same grace continues to speak to the future. There is a story from the middle of the 18th century when those who were in the bondage of slavery were unable or not allowed to join the church in worship with everybody else. That it is said that there was a service where the slaves were standing outside the building as everybody else was inside. And when the preacher stopped in proclaiming the good news, that one slave named Mary went into the doors of the church, walked down the aisle of the sanctuary, but it was there that the minister and the church turned her away. That she was insistent, but they would not embrace her. Instead, they said she would have to go to a black church to join. And it is said as she walked out of the sanctuary and through the doors of the church that all of the other slaves standing outside were singing this spiritual in the background. Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Pharaoh's army got drowned. It is the hope of life in the face of death, the hope of freedom in the face of oppression. It is the hope of Easter in the face of Good Friday. And along with Mary, the mother of Jesus' tears on Good Friday, it's important for us to remember also Mary Magdalene's cheers on Easter morning. Because there's that other spiritual about Mary Magdalene that says, run, Mary, run. Oh, run, Mary, run. I know the other world is not like this. That Mary Magdalene has good news to proclaim. That love is stronger than death. And anytime we feel the tears of Mary, the mother of Jesus, either for the circumstances that we face or the oppression or suffering that others face, we need to also remember Mary Magdalene running on Easter morning, not crying, but cheering about the good news of God's love that is stronger than death. But for most of our lives, we live somewhere between Good Friday and Easter morning. Somewhere between the tears of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and the cheers of Mary Magdalene. That we live on Saturday, Holy Saturday, as the church has called it, a day that is marked only by silence. That there are the tears and cries of Good Friday, but before the celebration of Easter morning, imagine the disciples sitting there on Saturday. No word from above, no confirmation about what is about to happen, only the lingering sorrow of Friday and the questions about Sunday, that all they hear is silence. And it's in that moment that we need to hear the spiritual say to us, Mary, don't you weep. Remember, there is hope in the love of God. And when we are living in between, or we are empathetic for others who are living in between, there is one other spiritual which speaks right to the heart of the prayers that are said on that very day. And it is that well-known spiritual kumbaya. Perhaps many of us have heard it by the campfire on a guitar, but it is far from a campfire song. It is sung originally by the Gullah culture found there on the coast of South Carolina and Georgia. First known recording was in 1926 in Darien, Georgia. And the phrase, "come by here," in the Gullah dialect sounds like kumbaya. So if we hear that text saying, "come by here," it says, someone's crying, "Lord, come by here." Someone's singing, "Lord, come by here." Someone's praying, "Lord, come by here." Someone needs you, Lord. Come by here. It is the prayer of Holy Saturday, of standing there in between the shadows of Good Friday and the light of Easter morning. It speaks to the wilderness that we find ourselves in so often, traveling from one place to the next, knowing that God is with us along the way, but also looking for God with us along the way. It's the people of God wandering through the wilderness after they left Egypt. It's Jesus wandering through the wilderness, facing temptation after his baptism. And it's there in the wilderness that we must remember Mary, the mother of Jesus' tears, and Mary Magdalene's cheers on Easter morning. That it is there we need to remember the steadfast love of God that holds us in between. That it is the power of life in the face of death. That the spiritual reminds us that we should never domesticate the love of God. Instead, we should set it loose, where it becomes a guide for us in life's most trying moments. When the shadows still linger and we don't have the confirmation of Easter morning, and we're there in the silence, hoping, wandering, searching, and seeking. And that we should set it loose so that it continues to widen the circle of our concern. Seeing those who live in such oppression or hardship, who live up against such vulnerability where they do not have protection around their lives. For us to remember them, to feel connected to them and bound to them. In similar ways, our circumstances right now of social distancing, of coming to grips with a global pandemic, reminds us of this very thing, that we are connected to everyone. That we look around the world and we know what other people are facing. We know those fears because they are our fears. When we are all pushed up against a sense of vulnerability, we are reminded of how connected we are to everyone. And if we are to look through that lens, it also reminds us of how vast the love of God is, reaching out and putting arms around everyone, calling us to love our neighbor, to be concerned for our neighbor, to feel connected to our neighbor, to see the world through the tears of Mary, through that heartache that she felt, and that hope that the spiritual calls us to. That Lent and our given circumstances call us to reclaim that prayer. In my life, Lord, come by here. In this world, Lord, come by here. In the life of my child, my loved one, my family, my friend, my neighborhood, my city, in the life of the stranger or the vulnerable. Lord, come by here. As we think about the spiritual and that line that says, "Oh Mary, don't you weep," perhaps as it speaks to the hope of the steadfast love of God, perhaps we could say, "Oh Mary, don't you weep for too long," that the day will come when we will sing and shout again. Amen.